What's happening in Chicago right now doesn't look like a normal off-season adjustment. It looks like a silent detonation happening behind polished press releases, carefully staged smiles, and the kind of fake calm that organizations project right before they make a ruthless decision. Because when you strip away the PR language, when you rip off the corporate wrapping paper and expose the raw machinery underneath, the picture becomes savage. The Chicago Sky may have already decided that the Angel Reese experiment is no longer the future of the franchise, but the liability threatening to drag the entire operation into a public and financial disaster. And the wildest part is that most fans still can't see it. They're watching surface-level headlines while a full-scale power shift unfolds in the shadows. They still think star branding guarantees protection. They still think virality equals value. They still think a franchise will keep bending around one player simply because she owns attention online. But front offices don't survive on likes, reposts, or hype clips. They survive on trust, leverage, chemistry, ticket movement, locker room control, sponsor confidence, and one brutal question that rules everything in professional sports: are you helping the business win, or are you becoming too expensive to protect? And once that question starts leaning the wrong way, the game changes fast. That's why this situation feels so dangerous, because this isn't just about a player having a dramatic season or a team going through growing pains. This feels like the beginning of a corporate separation disguised as patience. It feels like a franchise that has already started emotionally detaching from the face it once tried to market as untouchable. And if you pay attention to the sequence instead of the spin, it becomes terrifyingly clear. The trust fracture didn't happen in one loud explosion. It happened through a chain reaction of public friction, internal embarrassment, competitive instability, and image damage that kept stacking until it became impossible to ignore. The Sky weren't playing around last season. They were trying to survive. Every game mattered. Every public message mattered. Every relationship inside that locker room mattered. And in moments like that, organizations do not want noise, they want obedience, alignment, and complete message control. But instead of helping stabilize the structure, the franchise's most visible young asset became the center of the storm. The moment those internal frustrations spilled outward, the damage was no longer private. It was political. It was financial. It was organizational. Because when a player publicly sends signals that veterans aren't good enough, that the roster isn't being run correctly, or that the internal ecosystem isn't functioning, that doesn't just create headlines, it contaminates the market. Suddenly teammates are forced into silence. Coaches are cornered into awkward responses. Executives are dragged into a defensive posture. And the entire franchise starts looking like a house with smoke coming through the walls. That's where reputations begin to die. Not with one quote, but with the realization that one player's personal brand is now overpowering the team's internal authority. And for a front office, that's nightmare fuel. Because once the player starts becoming bigger than the room, you're no longer managing basketball, you're managing instability, you're managing ego, optics, backlash, and the constant threat that every disappointment could become a public spectacle. That's not a foundation. That's a ticking bomb. And if the people upstairs started feeling that way, then every move that followed begins to look less random and more like a slow, calculated distancing operation. The suspension wasn't just discipline, it was a message. It was the organization trying to reassert control in front of everyone. It was the franchise drawing a line and saying, no matter how loud your brand is, this building still has a hierarchy. But the problem is, once a franchise is forced to publicly discipline one of its own centerpiece names, the damage is already severe. That means the trust had already eroded behind closed doors. That means conversations had already gotten tense. That means executives had already reached a point where silence was no longer enough. And if the response to that discipline felt resistant, detached, or emotionally disconnected from the gravity of the moment, then what you get next is the most dangerous thing any franchise can face: a star-shaped fracture that can no longer be patched with slogans. Because from there, every action gets reinterpreted through suspicion. Every absence becomes political. Every public appearance becomes symbolic. Every off-court moment starts feeling like a referendum on whether the player is really with the team or simply using the team as a platform. And once fans start seeing that split, once insiders start whispering, once the locker room starts absorbing that tension, you're no longer dealing with normal adversity. You're dealing with institutional corrosion. That's what makes this situation feel so combustible. It's not just that Chicago may have a problem. It's that the problem is attached to the very identity they were trying to sell. Because if the player you marketed as your future starts becoming the reason your environment feels unstable, then your brand strategy turns into a trap. You can't fully defend her without alienating others. You can't fully distance yourself without exposing the fracture. You're stuck in a no-man's land where every move looks reactive and every week adds more pressure. And then comes the most lethal part of all, perception among people outside the building. Free agents see everything. Agents see everything. Rival executives see everything. Incoming rookies see everything. They may not say it publicly, but they absolutely clock which organizations feel unified and which ones feel emotionally radioactive. If a team starts projecting chaos, entitlement, or unmanageable ego, top talent notices immediately. Veterans with options do not voluntarily walk into drama. Elite players do not sign up to become side characters in someone else's branding war. They want structure. They want stability. They want a place where basketball still outranks social media theater. And if Chicago is beginning to look like a place where the noise is louder than the direction, then that's not just a temporary issue, it's a market problem. It affects recruiting. It affects retention. It affects sponsorship energy. It affects how easy it is to sell hope. That's why this whole situation feels less like gossip and more like an early-stage corporate purge. Because the modern sports business can tolerate underperformance. It can tolerate inexperience. It can even tolerate controversy for a while. But what it cannot tolerate for long is a centerpiece asset that creates more instability than confidence. Once that equation flips, the clock starts ticking. And the scariest thing for Angel Reese may be that Chicago doesn't need to publicly announce that shift for it to already be real. They can signal it through tone. Through scheduling. Through silence. Through who they prioritize. Through what they stop building around. Through what quietly disappears. And when a franchise starts removing the symbolic pillars that once centered around a player, that is not a coincidence. That is not forgetfulness. You can't fully distance yourself without exposing the fracture. You're stuck in a no-man's land where every move looks reactive and every week adds more pressure. And then comes the most lethal part of all, perception among people outside the building. Free agents see everything. Agents see everything. Rival executives see everything. Incoming rookies see everything. They may not say it publicly, but they absolutely clock which organizations feel unified and which ones feel emotionally radioactive. If a team starts projecting chaos, entitlement, or unmanageable ego, top talent notices immediately. Veterans with options do not voluntarily walk into drama. Elite players do not sign up to become side characters in someone else's branding war. They want structure. They want stability. They want a place where basketball still outranks social media theater. And if Chicago is beginning to look like a place where the noise is louder than the direction, then that's not just a temporary issue, it's a market problem. It affects recruiting. It affects retention. It affects sponsorship energy. It affects how easy it is to sell hope. That's why this whole situation feels less like gossip and more like an early-stage corporate purge. Because the modern sports business can tolerate underperformance. It can tolerate inexperience. It can even tolerate controversy for a while. But what it cannot tolerate for long is a centerpiece asset that creates more